Marcus Bennett stood in the cluttered garage of his modest two-bedroom home in Asheville, North Carolina. The late September air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and motor oil, his hands stained with grease as he tinkered with the lawnmower. He'd been meaning to fix for weeks. A 45-year-old mechanic with a quiet demeanor, the kind of guy who'd rather listen to the hum of an engine than the chatter of a crowd. His life had always been simple, a steady rhythm of early mornings at the auto shop, Sunday barbecues with neighbors, and evenings on the couch with his wife, Abigail, watching reruns of old sitcoms. They'd been married for 9 years, no kids, just a tabby cat named Rusty, who liked to nap on Marcus's lap. But lately those evenings felt hollow. Abigail, a 38-year-old event planner for a local non-profit, had always been the spark in their marriage, her laughter bright, her energy infectious. She'd call him M, with a playful wink, a nickname that used to make him feel like the luckiest man alive. But now, her late nights at the office had become the norm, her excuses piling up like the leaves outside. "It's just a big fundraiser. Em, you know how it is," she'd say, her voice light but distant. Marcus nodded, always nodded. He wasn't the type to push. He'd never been good at confrontation. The guy who'd apologize for breathing too loud, if it meant keeping the peace. But that afternoon, as he searched for a wrench in her tote bag, a bright red maple leaf slipped out, vibrant against the grey concrete floor. It was tucked between her planner's pages, a stark contrast to her meticulous notes about venue bookings and catering schedules. Marcus picked it up, the leaf crisp and unnaturally preserved, like it had been pressed with care. He chuckled, thinking it might be a keepsake from one of her fall-themed events. "Hey, Abby, what's with the leaf?" he called out, expecting her usual bubbly explanation. But Abigail, who was sipping coffee at the kitchen counter, froze mid-sip, her hazel eyes widening for a split second before a smile stretched across her face, too wide, too forced. "Oh, that? Just a silly thing from the team, you know, for the autumn gala," she said, her voice syrupy, unconvincing. She set her mug down with a clatter and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Marcus standing there, the leaf in his hand, feeling heavier than it should. His gut churned, a quiet alarm he couldn't ignore. He wasn't a suspicious man, but something about her reaction gnawed at him. Over the next few weeks, the signs multiplied. Another maple leaf appeared, this time on the passenger seat of her car after a client dinner. Her phone screen lighting up with notifications she quickly silenced, her laughter at odd hours when she thought he was asleep, the way she'd hum a jazz tune he'd never heard her listen to before. Marcus didn't confront her, he couldn't. He was the guy who fixed things, not the guy who broke them. But each new sign felt like a crack in the foundation of their marriage, a foundation he'd spent 9 years building. He kept the first leaf in his toolbox, hidden under a pile of screws, a secret reminder of the moment his world started to tilt. He didn't know what it meant, not yet, but he knew it wasn't nothing. Abigail's excuses grew flimsier, her late nights more frequent, and Marcus, for the first time in years, felt like a stranger in his own home. The cat on his lap purring softly as he stared out the garage window, the orange glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the driveway. He wondered how long he'd been ignoring the truth, how long he'd been pretending everything was fine. And as the days ticked by, the weight of that red maple leaf grew heavier, a silent warning of the storm that was coming, a storm he wasn't sure he was ready to face, but one he knew he couldn't avoid forever. Marcus Bennett sat on the worn leather couch in the living room of his Asheville home, the late October chill seeping through the cracked window, the faint glow of a street lamp casting jagged shadows across the hardwood floor. It was past midnight, and the house was silent except for the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the occasional rustle of Rusty, their tabby cat, shifting in his sleep on the armchair. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he clutched a glass of bourbon, the amber, liquid untouched, his heart pounding against his ribcage like a trapped bird. Abigail had left hours ago for another team meeting, her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost, her excuse this time as flimsy as the last. "It's for the big donor pitch, Em. I'll be late. Don't wait up," she'd said, her voice clipped, her eyes avoiding his as she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door. Marcus had nodded like he always did, but the red maple leaf he'd found in her bag weeks ago burned in his mind, its vibrant color a stark reminder of the doubts that had taken root in his chest. He wasn't a suspicious man, but the signs had been piling up. Her late nights, her secretive phone habits, the way she'd started wearing a new perfume he didn't recognize, a scent that didn't belong in their home. Tonight, though, something in him snapped. Maybe it was the way she'd barely looked at him as she left, or the hollow ache that had settled in his bones after weeks of pretending everything was fine. He set the bourbon down on the coffee table, the glass clinking against the wood, and his eyes fell on her purse. A sleek black leather bag she'd left on the counter in her haste. It sat there like a Pandora's box, daring him to open it. Marcus wasn't the type to snoop. He was the guy who left sticky notes on the fridge with messages like, "Bought your favorite creamer, love you." But tonight, the weight of his suspicion was too heavy to bear. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his breath shallow, and unzipped the purse. Inside, her phone lay nestled between a pack of gum and her planner, the screen dark, but taunting. He knew her password. She used the same one for everything. Their cat's name, Rusty 123. With a shaky finger, he unlocked the phone and navigated to her voicemail. His heart thudding so loudly he thought it might wake the neighbors. There were 4 messages, but he only played the most recent one. A man's voice filled the silence, deep and smooth, the kind of voice that commanded attention without trying. "Hey, Abby, got your message? Made me laugh. You always do. I'll be at the usual spot. Maple Grove Inn, room 312. Can't wait to see that smile again. Don't be late." The message ended with a low chuckle that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. He replayed it, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the phone. The words Maple Grove Inn and room 312 seared into his brain, each syllable a dagger to the life he thought they'd built together. He wanted to believe it was a mistake, a client, a friend. Anything but what his gut screamed it was. But the familiarity in the man's tone, the casual mention of the usual spot, shattered any hope of denial. Marcus sank back onto the couch, the phone still in his hand, his mind racing with images of Abigail in that room. Her laughter echoing down a hallway that didn't belong to him. He thought of the red maple leaf, the symbol that now made sickening sense. Maple Grove Inn, a quaint little place just outside Asheville, known for its fall foliage and discreet charm. A perfect spot for secrets. Marcus didn't cry, he didn't shout, he just sat there staring at the blank TV screen, the reflection of his own hollow eyes staring back at him. He thought of the mornings he'd made her coffee, the way he'd kissed her forehead before she left for work, the countless nights he'd waited up for her, believing her excuses because he loved her too much to doubt her. How long has she been carrying someone else's smile in her heart? He whispered to the empty room, his voice breaking. The betrayal settled into his chest like a stone, heavy and cold. He didn't confront her when she slipped in at 3 a.m., her heels clicking softly on the hardwood as she tiptoed to the bedroom. Thinking he was asleep, Marcus lay on the couch, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, the voicemail replaying in his mind like a broken record. He knew then that the man he'd been, the trusting, quiet mechanic who loved Abigail with every fiber of his being, was gone, replaced by someone new, someone who couldn't unhear that message, someone who couldn't pretend anymore. The red maple leaf in his toolbox was no longer just a mystery. It was proof that the woman he loved had been living a lie. And as the first light of dawn crept through the window, Marcus made a silent vow. He wouldn't be the fool anymore. Not after this, not ever again. Marcus Bennett stood in the dim light of his bedroom in Asheville, North Carolina, the early November air heavy with the scent of rain and pine, the distant hum of a neighbor's leaf blower cutting through the quiet Saturday morning. It had been 2 weeks since he'd heard the voicemail on Abigail's phone, 2 weeks since the words Maple Grove Inn, room 312 had carved a hole in his heart. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, his mind replaying the man's smooth voice, the casual intimacy of "can't wait to see that smile again," and the sickening realization that the red maple leaf he'd found wasn't just a random keepsake. It was a symbol of her betrayal. Marcus hadn't confronted her, not yet. He wasn't ready. Or maybe he was too afraid of what the truth would do to the fragile shell of their marriage, but the silence between them had grown thicker, a chasm filled with unspoken questions. Abigail acted as if nothing was wrong, her laughter a little too loud, her touches a little too deliberate. But Marcus saw through it, the way her eyes darted, a way when he looked at her too long, the way she'd started wearing her hair down to hide the tension in her jaw. He felt like a ghost in his own home, haunting the edges of a life that no longer belonged to him. The charity ball was tonight, a big annual event for Abigail's non-profit, a night of glitz and glamour to raise funds for local schools. Marcus had never been invited before. These events were for the big donors, the board members, the people who wrote checks with too many zeros. But this year, an email had landed in his inbox 3 days ago. "You're cordially invited to the Asheville Community Foundation's annual Fall Gala," the subject line read. His name typed out in crisp black font. Marcus knew Abigail had arranged it. It had her fingerprints all over it. Last minute, dramatic, a calculated move to parade him around as the dutiful husband, to prove to her colleagues that their marriage was fine, that she wasn't the woman. Sneaking off to room 312, but Marcus wasn't going for her, not anymore. He was going for himself, to face the truth, to see if he could look her in the eye and still recognize the woman he'd loved for 9 years. The day before the ball, Marcus did something he never thought he'd do. He drove to a small tattoo shop on the edge of town, a gritty little place called Ink Haven, the kind of spot where the buzz of needles mixed with the smell of antiseptic and cigarette smoke. He didn't go for anything flashy, just a small word inked on the inside of his right forearm, hidden beneath the sleeve of his flannel shirt. "Enough." The word was etched in simple black ink by a tattoo artist named Ray, a burly man with a grey beard and a surprisingly gentle touch. "This means something to you, huh?" Ray asked, his voice gruff but kind. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, it's a reminder," he said. "A reminder to stop being the man who accepted half-truths, who waited for Abigail to choose him, who ignored the red flags because he loved her too much to see them." When he got home, Abigail was already there, a rare early evening. She'd gone all out, the dining table set with their best plates, a bottle of red wine breathing on the counter, the kitchen filled with the aroma of garlic and rosemary from the roast chicken she'd made. "I thought we could have a nice dinner before the ball tomorrow," she said, her voice bright, her smile practiced. She even lit a candle, the one they'd bought on a trip to Savannah years ago, a scent of magnolia and sea salt that once meant everything to Marcus. But now it felt like a prop, a stage setting for a play he no longer wanted to act in. "You didn't RSVP yet," she added, pouring him a glass of wine, her fingers brushing his with a familiarity that made his skin crawl. "I figured I'd go," Marcus said, his voice flat. "Seemed important to you." Abigail paused, just for a moment, a flicker of unease crossing her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear, but she covered it quickly with another smile. "It'll be fun, Em. We haven't gone out like this in ages," she said. But her words rang hollow. They hadn't gone out as a couple. In months, no dates, no walks along the French Broad River like they used to. Just two people sharing a house, navigating each other's lies. That night, Marcus lay in bed beside her. The space between them a canyon, her breathing steady, her back turned to him. He stared at the ceiling, the word enough burning on his forearm, a quiet rebellion against the life he'd let himself live. He thought of the voicemail, the man's voice, the red maple leaf, and the way Abigail had started wearing a new necklace, a delicate silver chain with a tiny maple leaf pendant, a gift he hadn't given her. He wondered how long she'd been wearing it, how long she'd been carrying someone else's token while he made her dinner, while he waited up for her, while he loved her, the morning of the ball. Marcus woke to find a small gift box on the dresser, a note attached in Abigail's neat handwriting. "For tonight, love A." Inside was a pair of cufflinks, sleek and silver, engraved with his initials, the kind of gift she knew he'd never buy for himself. But Marcus recognized the brand. He'd seen it on a receipt she'd claimed was for a donor thank you gift. The cufflinks weren't for him. They were for the role he was supposed to play. The quiet, supportive husband who didn't ask questions, who didn't see the cracks, but Marcus was done playing that role. He slipped the cufflinks back into the box, his resolve hardening. He'd go to the ball, but not as her prop, not as her alibi. He'd go as the man who'd finally had enough, the man who was ready to face the truth. No matter how much it hurt, he'd wear the old denim jacket she hated, the one with the frayed collar and his scuffed work boots. Not to impress her, not to win her back, but to remind her of the man she'd broken, the man she'd underestimated. And as he looked at himself in the mirror, the tattoo on his forearm a quiet promise. Marcus knew tonight would change everything. He wasn't sure what he'd find at the charity ball, but he was sure of one thing. He wasn't leaving until he'd faced the woman Abigail had become, until he'd seen the truth in her eyes, until he'd taken back the pieces of himself she'd tried to erase. The grand ballroom of the Asheville Community Foundation's annual Fall Gala shimmered under a canopy of twinkling lights, crystal chandeliers casting a warm golden glow over tables draped in burgundy linens, the air buzzing with the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of polished conversation. Marcus Bennett stood near the edge of the crowd, his old denim jacket a stark contrast to the sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns, his scuffed work boots silent on the polished marble floor. The word enough etched on his forearm pulsed beneath his sleeve, a quiet fire fueling his resolve. Abigail had swept into the room moments ago, her navy silk dress hugging her frame, her smile as radiant as the spotlight on the stage, where the auctioneer called out bids for a weekend getaway. She moved through the crowd with the ease of a seasoned host, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, introducing Marcus to donors with a breezy, "This is my husband, Marcus," as if he were a prop in her perfect performance. But Marcus felt the weight of every glance, every forced smile, his mind a storm of the voicemail he'd heard weeks ago, Maple Grove Inn, room 312, and the red maple leaf pendant glinting. On her necklace, a cruel reminder of the secret she wore so openly. He watched her from across the room, his heart a tangled knot of pain and clarity. She hadn't noticed the shift in him yet, the way his eyes lingered too long, the way his silence wasn't just compliance anymore. About an hour into the event, Abigail excused herself, her hand brushing his arm with a rehearsed tenderness. "I need to check on the silent auction, Em. I'll be right back," she said, her voice lilting, but her eyes were already scanning the room, searching for someone else. Marcus didn't respond. He just nodded, his jaw tight, and watched her weave through the crowd. Her navy dress a beacon in the sea of black and gold. He knew where she was going. Not to the auction table, but to the man he'd already spotted near the bar. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a maple leaf pin on his lapel, the same symbol Marcus had come to loathe. The man's presence was magnetic, his laugh carrying over the jazz band's soft melody, and Marcus recognized the voice immediately. It was the same one from the voicemail, the same one that had haunted his sleepless nights. His stomach churned as he watched Abigail approach the man, her movements deliberate, her hand grazing his sleeve in a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Marcus saw it. He saw the way her smile softened, the way her body angled toward him, a private language he was never meant to understand. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut, raw and unrelenting. He should have been angry. He should have wanted to storm over and demand answers, but all he felt was a hollow ache, a void where his love for her used to be. Abigail turned then, as if sensing his gaze, her eyes meeting his across the room. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a crack in her perfect facade, but she quickly recovered, walking back toward him with the same poised grace, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just shattered the last piece of their marriage. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, his hands clenched at his sides, the noise of the gala fading into a dull roar. She reached him, her smile bright but brittle, and extended her hand, her fingers brushing his wrist, a gesture meant to anchor him, to pull him back into the role she'd cast him in. "Let's dance, Em. They're playing our song," she said, her voice soft, but the jazz band wasn't playing their song. It was a tune he didn't even recognize. Another lie, another performance. Something inside Marcus snapped. The word enough on his arm burned hotter, and he leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear, his voice a low, steady whisper that carried the weight of 9 years of love and betrayal. "You broke me first, Abigail," he said. The words sharp and final. Her hand froze in midair, her eyes widening, a flicker of panic breaking through her composure. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to weave another story, but Marcus didn't give her the chance. He stepped back, his gaze steady, unflinching, and turned away, the crowd parting around him as he walked toward the exit. Abigail's voice called after him, soft at first. "Marcus, wait." Then louder, more desperate, Marcus pleased, but he didn't stop, he didn't turn. He pushed through the heavy glass doors into the foggy November night, the cold air hitting his face like a slap, the sounds of the Gala muffled behind him. He walked to his truck, the same old pickup he'd driven for years, and slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a relentless stream of notifications he knew were from her, but he didn't look. He didn't need to hear her excuses, her promises, her lies. He started the engine and drove, the city lights blurring into streaks of color through the windshield. He didn't know where he was going, not back to the house, not back to the life he'd lived for her. He drove until the streets of Asheville gave way to winding mountain roads. The fog thicker now, wrapping the world in a heavy silence. Marcus pulled over at a lookout point, the Blue Ridge Mountains looming in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist. He stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots, and stood at the edge, the wind whipping through his jacket for the first time in weeks. He let himself feel the full weight of her betrayal. The voicemail, the maple leaf, the man at the bar, the years he'd spent loving a woman who'd stopped loving him back. He didn't cry, but his chest heaved with the force of a sob he wouldn't let out. He thought of the man he'd been, the quiet mechanic who loved Abigail with everything he had, and realized that man was gone. What remained was someone new, someone who'd walked away, someone who'd chosen himself. The fog rolled in thicker, and Marcus stood there, alone but not broken, not anymore. The fog clung to the Blue Ridge Mountains like a heavy shroud as Marcus Bennett drove away from the lookout point, his old pickup truck rumbling down the winding roads, the dashboard clock glowing 1:17 a.m., the silence of the night broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional chirp of a cricket. He hadn't looked at his phone since leaving the charity ball, but he could feel it buzzing in his pocket, a relentless reminder of Abigail's attempts to pull him back into the life he'd just walked away from. He didn't need to see her messages to know what they'd say. Excuses, apologies, promises she'd never keep. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, the headlights cutting through the mist, his hands steady on the wheel, the word enough on his forearm a quiet anchor in the storm of his emotions. He drove until he reached a small roadside motel just outside Hendersonville, a flickering neon sign reading vacancy, casting a faint pink glow over the gravel lot. He parked, grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat, the one he'd packed with essentials before the ball just in case, and checked into a room that smelled of stale coffee and pine cleaner. The bed sagged under his weight as he sat down, the springs creaking. He finally pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up with 42 missed calls, 19 text messages, all from Abigail. The texts started with confusion. "Marcus, where are you?" "Come back," then turned, pleading. "I can explain, please, I'm sorry." And finally desperate, "I love you, don't do this." Those 3 words, "I love you," hit him like a dull blade. Once they'd meant the world to him. Now they felt like a mockery, a hollow echo of a love that had died long before he'd whispered, "You broke me first." Marcus didn't reply. He turned the phone off, tossed it onto the nightstand, and lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the weight of the night settling into his bones. He thought of the years he'd spent loving Abigail, the mornings he'd made her breakfast, the nights he'd waited up, the way he'd ignored the red maple leaves, the late nights, the lies, because he wanted to believe in her. He realized, now that he'd been loving a ghost, a version of her that didn't exist anymore, maybe never had. The next morning, he drove to a friend's place in Brevard, a guy named Tommy, an old high school buddy who ran a small carpentry shop. Tommy didn't ask many questions when Marcus showed up with a duffel bag and a tired look in his eyes. He just handed him a cup of black coffee and pointed to the spare room above the workshop. "Stay as long as you need, man," Tommy said, his voice gruff but warm. The room was small, with a slanted ceiling and the faint smell of sawdust. But it was real, unpolished, a far cry from the curated life Marcus had lived with Abigail over the next few weeks. The rumors about Abigail spread like wildfire through Asheville's tight-knit community. Tommy's wife, a nurse at the local hospital, heard whispers that Abigail's non-profit had launched an internal review after reports of inappropriate conduct with a board member, the man with the maple leaf pin. Marcus didn't care about the details. He didn't want revenge. He didn't even want her to suffer. He just wanted to be free. Abigail tried to reach him, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to frantic explanations. "It was a mistake, Marcus. I was lost. I didn't mean to hurt you," she'd say, her voice cracking. She even sent a letter, pages of her neat handwriting on pale blue stationery, claiming she'd felt unfulfilled, that she'd never meant for it to go so far that they could fix things if he'd just come back. Marcus read the letter once, then tore it into pieces, not out of anger, but because he was done pretending her words could fix what she'd broken. He filed for divorce a month after the ball. The process was quick, no courtroom drama, just a few signatures on a stack of papers that severed 9 years of marriage. Abigail tried to call him the day the papers were finalized, but Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to hear her voice to know he'd made the right choice. He moved into a small apartment above a bakery in downtown Brevard, the smell of fresh bread wafting through the windows each morning. The place was modest, with creaky floors and a tiny balcony overlooking the main street. But it was his. No traces of Abigail, no red maple leaves, just a space to start over. The loneliness hit hard at first. Some nights he'd wake up reaching for her, only to remember she wasn't there. The ache in his chest a reminder of the life he'd lost, but slowly he began to rebuild. He started running again, jogging along the trails of Pisgah National Forest, the crunch of leaves under his sneakers a new kind of rhythm. He took up woodworking with Tommy, carving small figurines, cats, birds, little things that made him smile. He even joined a local book club at the library, something he'd never thought he'd do. But the quiet discussions about novels gave him a sense of community he hadn't realized he'd been missing. One evening, while browsing the bakery downstairs, he met a woman named Lila, a 40-year-old teacher with a soft laugh and a love for poetry. She wasn't glamorous like Abigail. Her hair was a mess of curls, her glasses always slipping down her nose, but her smile was genuine, her kindness unforced. They started talking over coffee, then long walks through the forest, sharing stories of their pasts, their scars, their hopes. Lila didn't push, she didn't demand, she just listened, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt seen, not as the man Abigail had broken, but as the man he was becoming. He didn't rush into anything with Lila. They took their time, building something real, something honest. And as the months passed, Marcus realized the fog in his chest had lifted, the betrayal that had once consumed him now a distant memory. He didn't hate Abigail, he didn't wish her ill. He hoped she'd find the honesty she'd never given him. But for Marcus, the greatest gift wasn't forgiveness, it was the freedom to be himself again, to love without fear, to live without lies. And as he stood on his tiny balcony one crisp spring morning, the sun rising over Brevard, a cup of coffee in his hand, Marcus knew he'd found something Abigail could never take away, his own peace.